Under the golden California sun, 5,000 people gathered in Heritage Square for the annual Classic Auto Festival. The crowd buzzed with anticipation. On stage, draped beneath a midnight blue velvet cover, sat a 1967 Ford Mustang Fastback, the jewel of Whitmore Heritage Motors' summer unveiling. Serena Whitmore, the company's young CEO, stood at the microphone, her crimson blazer catching the light like a victory flag. But in 20 minutes, that flag would be dipped in humiliation, because when she turned the key in front of the cameras, the engine would refuse to start. And in her fury, she would issue a challenge to the parking attendant, who dared to step forward a challenge that would change both their lives forever. Serena Whitmore was 32 years old, olive-skinned and elegant, with dark hair swept into a low chignon that showed off pearl earrings her father had given her the day she became CEO. She wore confidence like armor shoulders back, chin high, voice steady. But beneath that polished exterior ran a hairline fracture. Her father, Victor Whitmore, had built the company from a single garage in 1978. Now, 6 months after his sudden stroke, she stood alone at the helm, trying to prove she could honor his legacy without his guidance. The board whispered. The shareholders watched, and every decision felt like a tightrope walk over a canyon of doubt. Her public goal was simple: make this unveiling flawless, demonstrate leadership, secure investor confidence. Her secret fear was quieter but sharper, that she would hear the disappointment in her father's voice when he watched the footage from his rehabilitation center. Henry Carter was 41, lean and weathered, with calloused hands and grease permanently etched beneath his short nails. He wore a faded gray uniform with Carter embroidered above the pocket, a ghost of a surname that once meant something in Detroit. His hair, dark brown streaked with early silver, was kept military short. Around his neck hung a worn leather cord threaded through a brass key, the key to his father's 1962 Thunderbird, sold 15 years ago to pay medical bills. Henry had come to California for a fresh start after the accident, bringing only his toolbox and his 8-year-old son, Eli. He took the parking attendant job because it was quiet, because it required no explanations, because he could keep his head down and his heart closed. His motivation was singular: keep Eli safe, fed, and away from the wreckage of their past. Every paycheck was a small victory. Every anonymous shift was a shield against recognition, against questions, against the memory of the night his wife died, because he couldn't fix the brakes fast enough. Eli Carter was small for 8, with his father's dark eyes and his mother's bright curiosity. He carried everywhere a hand-built model of a Mustang, painted cherry red, that his father had made him for his 6th birthday. Eli had memorized every line of every engine his father ever touched. His signature phrase, delivered with absolute conviction, was this: "Dad says engines have feelings. You just gotta listen." Victor Whitmore, silver-haired and silent in a wheelchair 200 miles north, represented legacy and unspoken pressure. Miles Chen, the company's PR director, represented the quarterly earnings call and the tyranny of the spotlight. Ava Rodriguez, chief mechanical engineer, represented competence stretched too thin across too many projects. Each had their role to play in the machinery of the day, and each would be tested when that machinery ground to a halt. There were warnings, if anyone had been listening. The Delco distributor cap bore a faint scratch near the logo, a mark left by a tool slipping in haste. The brass key on Henry's leather cord trembled slightly when he passed within 10 feet of the Mustang, though he told himself it was only the vibration of the crowd. And Eli, standing on tiptoe at the edge of the staging area, pressed his ear to the velvet drape and whispered to his father, "I hear a click. Click. Like backwards." Heritage Square was a converted rail yard, all exposed brick and iron trusses, transformed for the weekend into a temple of chrome and horsepower. A massive LED screen broadcast close-ups of the stage. Drones circled overhead, feeding live streams to thousands more watching from home. The MC's voice boomed through the speakers. And now, the moment you've all been waiting for, the Whitmore Heritage Motors exclusive premiere. Serena had rehearsed her speech 17 times. She knew where to pause for applause, where to gesture toward the screen, where to let her voice drop into intimate sincerity. Miles had drilled her on the key performance indicators. 3 million impressions by Monday, 2 major automotive blog features, investor calls scheduled within 72 hours. The numbers hummed in her head like a second heartbeat. In the parking lot behind the main pavilion, Henry guided a vintage Corvette into its spot with hand signals alone. No words, just the language of angle and clearance that he spoke fluently. Eli was supposed to stay in the brake tent, but he'd slipped away, drawn by the magnetic pull of the Mustang. He stood now at the base of the stage, one hand resting on the platform's edge. His head tilted in that particular way that meant he was listening to something no one else could hear. Backstage, Ava Rodriguez stared at her tablet and felt her stomach tighten. The fuel system diagnostic showed sediment in the carburetor bowl, not enough to prevent ignition entirely, but enough to make starting uncertain. She'd flagged it in her report 2 days ago, but the live stream was scheduled, the sponsors were committed, and the CEO had signed off on the run sheet with a single word scrawled in red ink: proceed. Ava closed the tablet and reminded herself that she was an engineer, not a fortune teller. Engines were machines. Machines were predictable, and yet, the moment arrived like a curtain falling. Serena gripped the pull cord attached to the velvet drape. She smiled for the cameras, wide and warm. The fabric whispered as it slid away, revealing the Mustang in all its restored glory: deep Highland green, chrome bumpers gleaming, white leather interior pristine. The crowd erupted. Flashbulbs popped. Serena stepped to the driver's side, opened the door with rehearsed grace, and slid behind the wheel. She turned the key. The starter motor cranked. Once. Twice. The engine coughed, shuddered, and died. The LED screen showed her face in merciless detail, the flicker of confusion, the tightening around her eyes. She tried again. The same sickening cough, the same hollow silence afterward. Ava rushed forward, her voice low and urgent. Give it 30 seconds. The floats might be stuck, but her hands were shaking, and the crowd had already begun to murmur. A shareholder in the VIP section leaned toward his companion. $3.2 million in restoration, and it won't even start. Fantastic optics. His voice carried farther than he intended. Eli tugged on his father's sleeve. Dad, the wires are backwards. Number 3 and number 5. I can hear it in the click. Henry wanted to pull his son away, to disappear back into the anonymity of the parking lot. But Eli's eyes were fixed on Serena, on the humiliation spreading across her face like a stain. And something in Henry's chest, something he'd thought he'd buried with his wife, began to ache. Serena stepped out of the car. Her cheeks were flushed, her jaw set. She scanned the crowd until her gaze landed on Henry, identifiable by his gray uniform and the parking badge clipped to his belt. She didn't know his name. She didn't know his story. She knew only that he was there, and that she needed a target for her fear. You, she called, her voice sharp enough to cut through the murmuring crowd. Your staff. You must know something about engines. Come up here and start this car. Henry felt every eye in the square turn toward him. He shook his head slowly. Ma'am, I just park the cars. Then park this one in a garage where it works. Laughter rippled through the audience, uncertain, uncomfortable laughter. Serena wasn't finished. She raised her voice, playing to the crowd now, desperate to reclaim control through bravado. Tell you what. If you can start this classic car in front of all these people, I'll kiss you, right here, on this stage. The crowd roared, some with delight, some with shock. The drones pivoted, focusing their cameras on the parking attendant and the impossible wager. Miles buried his face in his hands. Ava's tablet slipped from her grip, and clattered to the stage floor. Henry looked at his son. Eli was staring at him with absolute faith, the kind of faith that only children possess, the kind that expects adults to fix the unfixable. And Henry realized, with a sinking certainty, that he had no choice. Not because of the kiss, not because of the crowd, but because if he walked away now, Eli would learn that when powerful people humiliate you, you stay silent. And that was a lesson Henry refused to teach. He stepped forward, his voice quiet but clear. "I'll need space to work, and I'll need everyone to step back 3 meters. No cameras within that perimeter. Safety first." Serena blinked, caught off guard by his calm authority. She nodded to the crew. Henry approached the Mustang like a surgeon approaching an operating table. He knelt by the driver's side, one hand resting on the fender, and closed his eyes. The crowd thought he was praying, but he was listening to the tick of cooling metal, to the whisper of air through the grill, to the faint electrical hum that told him the battery was charged but something downstream was misfiring. He opened the hood. The engine bay was immaculate, every component polished to showroom perfection. But perfection could hide problems. He traced the spark plug wires with his fingertips, feeling for heat, for resistance. Number 3 and number 5 were indeed transposed a rookie mistake, or a sabotage, or simply the chaos of a rushed restoration. He pulled the distributor cap and examined the breaker points. They were worn nearly flat. The gap closed to almost nothing. He touched the carburetor bowl and felt the gritty residue of old gasoline mixed with sediment. And then he saw it, etched into the underside of the distributor housing, barely visible beneath years of grime. Carter, 2007. His breath caught. This wasn't just any distributor. This was a Carter Spark prototype, a high-efficiency ignition system his father had designed 40 years ago for racing applications, a design that had died with his father's workshop when the bank foreclosed. Henry had thought every trace of that innovation was lost. But here it was, resurrected in a Whitmore restoration, uncredited and unacknowledged. He swallowed the rising anger and focused on the task. From his pocket, he pulled a small leather pouch, his field kit, assembled from scrap and improvisation. A length of 18-gauge copper wire, a 10mm bolt wrapped in fine-grade sandpaper, a jeweler's screwdriver. He corrected the spark plug wires, number 3 to cylinder 3, number 5 to cylinder 5. He filed the breaker points until they shone, then adjusted the gap to 16/1000ths of an inch using a folded business card as a makeshift feeler gauge. He hand-cranked the engine a quarter turn to prime the fuel pump, then blew gently into the carburetor to clear any vapor lock. As he worked, the engine gave a single, sharp backfire. Henry instinctively threw himself in front of Ava, shielding her from the small burst of flame that licked out of the carburetor throat. The crowd gasped. Eli didn't flinch. He'd seen his father work engines all his life, and he knew that backfires were just a machine's way of breathing wrong. Henry straightened, wiping soot from his hands. He looked at Serena. The compression was too high, and the air-fuel mixture is rich because of the sediment. It's safe now, but when you turn the key, don't touch the accelerator. Just let it catch. Hold it at 1500 RPM if it fires. Don't pump the pedal, or you'll flood it. Serena's anger had drained away, replaced by something closer to awe. She nodded and slid back into the driver's seat. Henry made one final adjustment, advancing the timing by 2 degrees, just enough to account for the worn points, then stepped back and gave her a single nod. She turned the key. The starter cranked. Once. The engine coughed, missed, then suddenly caught with a deep, rumbling growl that shook the stage. Black smoke puffed from the exhaust, then cleared to a faint blue haze as the carburetor balanced itself. The tachometer needle climbed to 1400 RPM and steadied. Serena held it there, her foot light on the pedal, her eyes wide. The sound was perfect, not the sanitized purr of a modern engine, but the raw, muscular heartbeat of a machine built when horsepower was measured in thunder. The crowd erupted. 5,000 people on their feet, cheering, whistling, chanting. Eli jumped up and down, his model Mustang held high like a trophy. Ava grabbed Miles's arm and laughed with sheer relief. The drone swooped in, capturing every angle of the idling engine, the smiling CEO, and the parking attendant standing quietly to the side, his hands still streaked with grease. Serena stepped out of the car, leaving it running. She walked toward Henry, her expression unreadable. The crowd hushed, waiting. She stopped in front of him, close enough that he could see the unshed tears in her eyes. Tears of gratitude, of humiliation, of something more complicated than either. "I keep my promises," she said quietly. Then she leaned in and kissed him on the cheek. A brief, chaste gesture that somehow carried the weight of genuine acknowledgement. The crowd roared again. Henry stood very still, his face flushed, his heart hammering in a way that had nothing to do with adrenaline, and everything to do with the woman in front of him who had just chosen grace over pride. Within an hour, the moment was everywhere. Not just the automotive blogs, but the mainstream feeds, the late-night monologue prep sheets, the meme factories. Kiss to Start CEO trended for 6 hours. GIFs of Henry's calm focus, of Serena's shocked delight, of Eli's triumphant jump circulated endlessly. Some praised her for keeping her word. Others criticized the stunt as exploitative. Most simply enjoyed the unexpected sweetness of it, the powerful executive humbled, the working-class hero vindicated, the kiss that sealed the reversal. Miles wanted to spin it harder, to book Serena on morning shows, to turn Henry into a feel-good spokesperson for the brand. Serena refused. She'd seen the way Henry's eyes had shuddered when the cameras closed in, the way he'd instinctively stepped between Eli and the crowd. She understood, suddenly and completely, that he didn't want fame. He wanted to be left alone. And she respected that, even as it frustrated Miles's quarterly projections. But she couldn't let it end there. That evening, after the festival had emptied and the square had returned to its usual quiet, she found Henry and Eli in the parking lot. Eli was tracing the Mustang model's fender with one finger, humming the engine note he'd memorized. Serena knelt to his level. "Did you hear its heartbeat?" Eli asked her, his eyes serious. "Before it started, I mean. Did you listen?" Serena glanced at Henry, then back at Eli. "I didn't. But I think I'm starting to now." She stood and showed Henry a photograph on her phone, a close-up of the distributor housing, the etched words visible in high resolution. "Carter, 2007. That's you, isn't it? Or your family?" Henry's jaw tightened. "It was my father's design. He never got to patent it. The bank took everything when he died." Serena felt something shift inside her. The first crack in the armor she'd worn since her father's stroke. She made a decision in that moment, one that would cost her political capital and board votes, but felt more necessary than any quarterly earnings call. "I need to know where it came from. Will you help me find out?" Henry looked at his son, at the model in his small hands, at the woman who was asking him to reopen a wound he'd spent years trying to heal. Finally, he nodded. "But Eli comes with me, and if I find out someone stole my father's work, I won't stay quiet." "I wouldn't ask you to," Serena said. The trail led through layers of corporate acquisitions and bankruptcy auctions. The ignition system in the Mustang had come from a bulk parts purchase, sourced from Axiom Dynamics, a failed startup that had bought assets from Carter Automotive Innovations during its liquidation in 2009. Victor Whitmore had acquired the lot legally, through a surplus auction, never knowing the prototype parts carried a buried legacy. The Carter Spark patent application had been filed, but never completed, abandoned due to unpaid fees during the chaos of foreclosure. The design had fallen into a legal gray zone. Not stolen outright, but not properly credited or compensated either. It was the kind of tragedy that happened to small inventors all the time, swept away by the machinery of commerce. Serena sat in her father's office, her office now, and replayed a cassette tape she'd found in his desk. His voice, years younger, speaking to a pit crew. Listen to the truth the engine tells you. Don't hear what you want, hear what it needs. She thought of Henry, kneeling by the Mustang, his eyes closed in concentration. She thought of her own rehearsed speeches, performed for cameras that captured everything except honesty. She called Henry. I found everything. Your father's patent application. The auction records. It's all legal, but it's not right. There was a long silence on the other end. Then, what are you going to do about it? That depends. What would you need to see? For Eli, I mean. What does he need to learn from this? Henry's voice was rough. He needs to see that adults can do the right thing even when it's hard. Even when it costs them. Then that's what we'll do, Serena said. She scheduled a press conference for the following Tuesday, not a triumphant product launch, but a reckoning. The Heritage Square Pavilion was packed again. But this time the energy was different. Wary. Curious. Expectant. Serena stood at the microphone without notes. 2 weeks ago, I asked a man to fix an engine I didn't understand. He did it with skill, with grace, and with tools he made from scrap because he couldn't afford better. What I didn't know, what none of us knew, was that the heart of that engine was designed by his father 40 years ago, and his father never received credit, never received compensation, died believing his work was forgotten. She paused, letting the words settle. I'm here to correct that. Whitmore Heritage Motors is establishing the Carter Whitmore Initiative, a program dedicated to identifying and crediting uncelebrated innovations in automotive history. We're also launching the Carter Fellowship, a scholarship fund for young mechanics and engineers who can't afford traditional education but have the talent and dedication to change the industry. And we're retroactively licensing the Carter Spark design, with payments going to the Carter estate, effective immediately. A reporter raised her hand. Miss Whitmore, some are calling the Kiss Bet stunt exploitative. What's your response? Serena took a breath. It was. I weaponized a public moment to deflect my own embarrassment, and I put someone in an impossible position. I've apologized to Mr. Carter privately, and I'm apologizing publicly now. The lesson I learned isn't about engines. It's about respect. And if this initiative can teach that lesson to even one other company, one other leader, then maybe something good can come from my mistake. Henry stepped forward, surprising even Serena. He took the microphone, his hands steady despite the cameras. My father used to say that every engine is a conversation. You listen, it talks. You ignore it, it breaks. I think that's true for people too. Today, someone listened. And that's how we restart not just engines, but the way we treat each other's work, each other's dignity. The applause was slower this time, but deeper. Not the excited roar of entertainment, but the considered approval of something earned. Over the following weeks, something unexpected happened. Serena started spending evenings in Henry's workshop, a converted garage near the rail yard, where he kept his father's remaining tools. She'd arrive in jeans and an old sweatshirt, her CEO armor left at the office. Henry taught her to read the color of exhaust flame, to feel the difference between a healthy valve train and a worn one, to understand that listening wasn't passive, but an active skill that required patience and humility. Ava joined them sometimes, bringing Eli along to experiment with clear acrylic spark plug mock-ups that showed the ignition process in real time. Eli would narrate for her. See? The spark jumps the gap at exactly the right time, and then he'd snap his fingers. Boom. Controlled explosion. Just like feelings. Gotta time it right. One evening, Serena arrived with a package wrapped in brown paper. Inside were a pair of work gloves. Premium leather. Broken into softness. Embroidered on each cuff in gold thread. Listen. Henry held them, speechless. Serena shrugged. Suddenly shy. You gave me back my father's lesson. Figured I'd return the favor. But the board of directors was less sentimental. 3 members led by Marcus Brennan, a venture capitalist with a controlling interest called an emergency meeting. The Carter Whitmore Initiative was bleeding capital. The fellowship was unfocused. The public apology had made the company look reckless. If Serena couldn't demonstrate measurable value, they'd call a vote of no confidence. Serena sat across from Henry in the workshop, her head in her hands. They want me to prove that integrity is profitable. How do I do that with a carburetor and a prayer? Henry wiped his hands on a rag, thinking. You build something that lives in both worlds. Classic heart, modern safety. Show them. You can honor the past without getting stuck in it. He gestured to the Mustang, now fully restored and running flawlessly. Take this. Strip out the dangerous parts, keep the soul. Call it a restomod. Use the Carter Spark philosophy. Efficiency, reliability, respect for the machine. If we can demo it perfectly, prove the concept works, maybe they'll see the value. Serena looked up. We'd need to do it in front of them. The board. The community. One take. No second chances. Like every other engine start, Henry said. You just gotta listen first. They worked for 3 weeks straight, turning the Mustang into a bridge between eras. The original carburetor and points ignition were replaced with modern fuel injection and a solid-state ignition module, but designed using Carter's principles of balanced combustion and minimal waste. The body remained untouched. The exhaust note stayed true. It was the same car, but safer, cleaner, more reliable. A machine that honored its history while embracing its future. The test drive was scheduled for a Thursday evening at the Whitmore facility's private track. Board members, community leaders, and a carefully curated group of journalists assembled under portable lights that bathed the asphalt in warm gold. The Mustang sat at the starting line, engine silent, waiting. Henry stood beside the driver's door. Last time, I started it for you. This time, you drive. Serena's hands trembled slightly as she gripped the wheel. Henry leaned in through the open window. Feel the key. You'll know when it's right. Just like your father taught you. She closed her eyes, turned the key, and listened, really listened, to the precise instant when the starter engaged, when the fuel ignited, when the engine caught and settled into a perfect idle. 750 RPM. Steady as a metronome, smooth as breathing. She drove a single lap, accelerating through the curves, letting the engine sing. When she pulled back to the start, the idle held. No stumble, no hesitation, just the pure, honest heartbeat of a machine built right. She stepped out, left the engine running, and walked to where Henry stood with Eli. The crowd was silent, waiting for speeches, for proclamations. Instead, Eli looked up at his father and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Now, kiss for a good reason." The crowd laughed genuine, warm laughter. Serena met Henry's eyes. This time, there were no cameras pressuring them, no bets forcing the moment. Just 2 people who had learned to listen, to respect, to see each other clearly. She kissed him, and he kissed her back. And the Mustang's engine purred steadily behind them, like a benediction. 6 months later, the first Carter Whitmore workshop opened in a converted warehouse downtown. 20 students, mechanics, engineers, high school dropouts, and MIT graduates gathered for the inaugural class. Ava taught the technical curriculum. Henry taught the ethics. Safety first, credit always. Listen before you diagnose. Serena stood at the back of the room during the first session, watching Ava walk a young woman through the principles of ignition timing. The student's hands were uncertain, her questions tentative, but when she finally got the demonstration engine to fire cleanly, her face transformed with the same joy Serena had felt when the Mustang started on that humiliating, redemptive day in Heritage Square. Eli had hung his model Mustang on the workshop wall, next to a poster that read, in bold letters, "Feel the heartbeat." Beneath it, in smaller text, Victor Whitmore and Robert Carter, because legacy is listening. That night, Serena and Henry stood on the balcony of her apartment, looking out over the city. She leaned against him, his arm around her shoulders. "Do you think it's enough? The initiative, the fellowship, all of it?" Henry was quiet for a moment. Then, "My father used to say that you can't restart the past, but you can make sure the future remembers." He kissed the top of her head. "Yeah, I think it's enough." They didn't just start a classic car that day in Heritage Square. They restarted the way people treat one another with respect, with honesty, with the courage to listen before speaking, and to credit before claiming. The engines would keep turning. The legacy would keep growing. And somewhere in a rehabilitation center up north, Victor Whitmore watched the footage on his tablet, his good hand resting on his heart. Feeling its steady, hopeful beat,